tell us about when this script came in, what your reaction to it, because I think you actually tweeted your reaction to it when you read it.
It was accurate. Yeah,
Okay.
I had heard about the script from a few people, from actors and some writers who knew it was very good, and it kind of just had a reputation for being one of the best scripts out there, and people knew that, and it was very exciting that it was happening. And when it came to me, I was really thrilled to get right into it. And I think by page like 15, I yelled out, "Can they do that?" And I was really, I was shocked that a script could be so ambitious and tight. Like, I was really in awe of it being able to take this emotional journey, but also take all these incredible pivots and somehow remain intact. And I just couldn't understand. And then I talked to Dan, and I thought, okay, this is an impossible combination of things, because I have this algorithm, which I actually stole from Jon Favreau, which I think is really useful for all actors deciding whether to do films. You have 3 factors. You have your cast, your director, and your script. You can take a risk on one. It's pretty reliable, and I wasn't taking any risks on this because Oscar was already cast, and I was really excited. That wasn't a risk. I was super excited to work with him, obviously. The script was airtight and beautiful, and I really loved Dan's work and had heard only amazing things about him from everybody. So that was my reaction. I was like, well, hey, let's do this.
But picking up on Olivia's idea, can you do this in a script? As you're writing it, how much are you consciously thinking about conventions of screenplay and trying to break those conventions in terms of narration, in terms of breaking, I don't know what it is in film. Is it the fourth wall, the fifth wall? Yeah. Are you consciously doing that as you're writing?
No, I mean my writing process, if there is one, I'm very stream of consciousness. I'm not trained. I've been taught on the job how to write a screenplay, how to direct a movie, and so I was just writing. I sat down to write a story, and I wrote it over the course of the year, let it evolve. I knew I was doing some weird stuff tonally. I wasn't doing it consciously or to make a point. I just this story started forming in my head, and I wrote it down, and it didn't go a lot further than that.
Did it start with an idea? Did it start with a setting? Did it start with vignettes? What was the initial germ?
You know, I sat down, I turned on my iTunes shuffles, and Bob Dylan came on, and it was Time Out of Mind, the first song, and so that started. I wrote this strange scene with Samuel Jackson, and then it went from there, and I really had no plan. Other times in my life, I've written films, Crazy Stupid Love, or my first film I did, Danny Cons, where I had the idea and the plan. This one was it evolved as I went, and there was no plan.
Good news and bad news is Bob Dylan, yes, you like it, getting the music, writing around the music. What does that mean? And probably the producers have something to say about this, because Bob Dylan is probably very protective of his music. What are those conversations like, and where does it go in terms of the songs that you need to have and the lyrics you want to use?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it like Samuel L. Jackson. I wrote Bob Dylan into the film very predominantly without obviously having ever met Bob Dylan. And so that became a process for the 3 of us to figure out. It wasn't something that you could get around easily. We had a character named Dylan. It's referenced in the film. And so
my daughter Elvis.
Yeah. So we went, the guys get dealt, but we went to New York, and we sent the script. And
Bob has a fellow working for him named Jeff Rosen, who his only client is Bob Dylan. And he has the most incredible office. It's like a time capsule, and just a few employees are there, but it's been there probably the same, 50 years probably he's been in this place. And Dan and Marty and I walked in and just kind of started talking to him, and he just started talking about Bob and started playing us various different music. And he had all the music that Bob had written, and he could separate each of the tracks, and you could listen to the drum track in this. And we sat there for about an hour just listening to like a dissection of like a Rolling Stone, I think it was, right? And he just kind of broke this whole song down. It was like the most amazing music lesson. We walked out of there feeling like, well, we got something from this. If anything, we got that. We didn't have the songs yet, but then he was a huge partner for us to be able to. He loved the script. And he wanted Bob to be a part of this.
I want to ask you about putting the cast together. I think Olivia said that Oscar was already on board. What were those initial conversations, and what were your conversations? What did he want to hear from you about the character he was playing?
I mean, I think Oscar's he's a tremendous actor, and obviously I think he's the actor of his generation in that space, and I think he wanted to just he gets very inside the character. He wanted to talk about a couple of things. He was kind of pretty on board. He was in a place where he was like kind of had limited time, and so he wanted to do it. What happened was once Oscar's on board, because he's on page 1 of the script, it becomes much easier to get the ensemble that you dream of, and because you're able to say, I've got Oscar already, and so it makes you look like a better writer than you actually are. And so Olivia was next, and then I had worked with Annette Bening before, who wanted to work with Oscar also, and Olivia said lovely things, but I'm sure probably Oscar was a huge driving force, because who doesn't want to like act for 40 pages with Oscar Isaac? And then it just went from there, so it built upon itself.
I'm going to ask you about your editor, about Julie Monroe. And there's a lot of work that's done editorially, and I don't know if it matches up page for page as you wrote it. What did you discover through editorial that changed the film, and how would you describe your partnership with Julie?
It's a great question, and she's exceptional, and I've done my 2 films with her, and I would literally, with my editor, I would probably, if my editor wasn't available, I would not do a film. Like, that's how strongly I feel about her. The script that I first wrote that Marty and Aaron read and decided they wanted to make is almost exactly what's on the screen. It didn't really evolve. We didn't change any structure or any of that. The movie is such a complicated tonal like balancing act that like it's all between the lines and between the margins, and that's what Julie does really well. And so like, as opposed to kind of going through every performance and saying we need this and that, it's a real subtle tonal shift that hopefully works for people, where you're shifting tone purposefully. So in parts of this film, it's a straight up comedy, like with Samuel Jackson, or other parts, it's a straight up romantic comedy. And then at parts, it's very dark and very dangerous and weird. And so the goal is to editorially give people the space to be able to kind of transition, so it's not like so that they recognize that something unusual is happening, but that they're still braced for it. So the example I give of what Julie did is after Oscar's suicide, which is obviously the kind of we've just lost both of these characters, surprisingly, who we love. And I always worried, will the audience be able to come back from that? And I really genuinely and truly thought this film would come out in 2 movie theaters. And then if it caught a wind, maybe it would get wider because of that. And what Julie did so artfully was figure out a way to hold on after that moment, so the audience has a moment to breathe. Is this real? Your brain should start going, wait, is this real? Are they going to do a funny thing with the unreliable narrative? Then holy shit, this is real. And then it transitions, and then you have enough time. And then the pace with which you get back to Mandy Patinkin and the little girl talking about the subtext of what she's worried about is when the audience starts coming back to life a little bit. And that is all about an editorial balance of timing and pace and tone. That has nothing to do with the writing or the performances, and has everything to do with how you manage it.
When actors like you read this script, they can imagine and picture themselves in it. When somebody who's going to finance a movie reads this, they probably have an easier time picturing themselves not being a part of it, because it's a difficult movie. How did this movie get made? How did you get the money together?
We're still a little shocked that it happened. In all honesty, the script did a lot of the hard work for us. It was as Olivia just said, it was a script that Dan read on spec and was out there, that enough people had read and it had been talked about, so that when it crossed our desks, we had never made a movie before, and I knew Marty had read it before us, and it was just something everybody kind of fell in love with, us included. And that made it a whole lot easier when you find something, a spec script like this at this quality level, and it was just original. So that certainly helps.
Marty?
Yeah, I find that 90% of my day ends in failure. And I had failed to get to produce 4 of Dan's scripts beforehand, just circumstances. And so when I got the 5th script, I actually was excited to read it just as a fan. So, when you talk about, whether or not we can survive what happens 40 minutes into the film, as I was reading it for the first time, I had that same moment. Like, I stopped and said, wow, you just killed both of your leads. How are you going to go from here? And I had the privilege of going on that ride for the first time. And as an audience, being able to say, wow, well, he pulled me back in, so clearly it must be working. But the honest truth with making this film, by the time I got a hold of it and started beginning to pitch Dan to let us be a part of it, Aaron and Film Nation had also gotten it, and it actually came together kind of quickly. So that wasn't the hard part here.
And really, it was Dan's. The thing that drove it was Dan's schedule. He had, as you know, he probably knows he has a day job, and he had a very short, narrow window in which he was able to make the film. And that's what really drove the whole thing to coming into existence very, very quickly. So we decided on a budget, and we shot the script.
What do you hope people take away from this film? What do you hope they are having conversations about after it's over?
Catharsis and the idea of interconnectedness of the human family and our literal families. I mean, that's what it really brought to me, was an awareness of how I am just an extension of my mother's story and her mother's story. And ever since I've had kids, I've thought, well, your children are your afterlife. Like, that's what happens after you die. Even if they aren't your own children, like, those stories are what we leave. And I hope people sort of have a chance to give that some thought. But most importantly, for right now in the world, I hope there's a sense of connection to people who are far, far away from us in different cultures, different countries. Just, I think more than anything, that could probably heal the world.
Marty, Aaron, Olivia, Dan, thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you, guys.